It's another free sewing pattern today. Today we're sewing the Alexa Ruffle Trim Blouse by Tiana's Closet. This top has a statement ruffle detail down the center front as well as 4 front buttons. I'm using a lightweight cotton woven for this project, and when I tested the material out on the serger kind of just wanted to eat the fabric. So in this video today, you'll see me do all my finishing stitches on the regular sewing machine just using a zigzag stitch. This is another beginner-friendly project, and I think you can get it all done within an afternoon. So go grab one of your pretty woven fabrics, print out the free pattern, and join me for this sew-along. Here are the wrong sides of my front bodice pieces, and I'm going to pin the darts. Now I'll sew my darts from the outside edge to the point, leaving thread tail so I can tie them in knots. And then press your darts downward. Place your front and back pieces right sides together and pin the shoulder seams. And also pin the side seams. Sew both shoulder seams and both side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges. To prepare to hem the sleeves at a later step, I'm going to pre-press memory creases into the bottom of the sleeve. Press the raw edge to the wrong side by 1/4 inch, and then press that once again 3/4 inch. Now that I have those memory creases, I'll open them out for now and fold the sleeve in half right sides together. And pin the underarm. And I'll repeat for both sleeves. Now I'll sew these seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges and then press the seams toward the back. And then to hem the sleeves, I'll fold them along their pre-pressed lines. And with that 1/4 inch fold tucked under, I'll pin in place. Now I'll edge stitch close to that inner upper fold all the way around for both sleeves. To prepare to insert the sleeve into the armhole, I'm going to sew basting stitches from notch to notch along the sleeve head, with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving thread tails on both ends so I have threads to pull for easing. Now with the sleeve and its corresponding armhole right sides together, I'll match the underarm seam and pin in place. I'll also match the notches that indicate front and back, as well as the notch at the top of my sleeve that indicates the shoulder seam. Then I can pull my basting stitches so that the top of the sleeve fits the top of the armhole. Once it fits, pin in place. Then we can sew the sleeve into the armhole with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges, and press the seam allowance toward the sleeve. Apply interfacing to the wrong side of your facing pieces, then place them right sides together and pin the shoulder seams. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. To finish the outer edges of the facing all the way around, I'm going to take it to the ironing board and fold the raw edge to the wrong side by a 1/4 inch all the way around. Now that those outer edges are pressed, I'm going to edge stitch close to the inner raw edge all the way around. Fold the bottom straight edge of your ruffle piece so that it's right sides together, and we're going to sew the bottom straight edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I'll trim that sewn corner and turn it right side out, poking out the corner. Then we can fold the ruffle wrong sides together and give it a press. Now we're going to sew gathering stitches along the raw edge of the ruffle piece from the bottom of the straight edge to the bottom of the curved edge with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Leave thread tails on both ends. I've pulled the basting stitches on both sides of the ruffle piece so that I have a gathered piece that matches my right center front. I'm going to pin the top curved edge of the ruffle piece at the shoulder seam, right sides together. And I want the bottom finished edge of the ruffle to be 1 inch away from the bottom raw edge of the bodice. Continue pinning the ruffle piece to the right center front. Then I'll baste the ruffle in place. Now that the ruffle is basted in place to the right front bodice, place the facing right sides together with the bodice and pin in place all the way around. At the bottom short edges of the facing on both sides, I'm going to sew horizontally with a 1 inch seam allowance, just as far as the facing. As you sew that 1 inch seam allowance along the bottom on the right side, make sure that you don't catch the bottom of your ruffle in your stitches. Now I'll sew all around the center front and the back neckline with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to clip into the curves of the center front, careful not to snip through the stitching. And I'm also going to clip the corners along the bottom center fronts. Then I'm going to open out the facing away from the garment and sew the seam allowance to the facing all the way around. Since we've sewn the bottom edges of the facing to the blouse, just understitch as far as you can. Now turn the facing to the inside of the garment and poke out those center front corners. And then give those facing edges a good press. At both of the shoulder seams, I'm going to stitch in the ditch from the outside just as far as the facing to keep the facing from flapping around on the inside of the garment. For the bottom hem of the garment, I've gone ahead and pressed the edges just as I did for the bottoms of the sleeves, pressing the raw edge to the wrong side first by a 1/4 inch and then once again by 3/4 inch for a full 1 inch hem. Then we can sew from one side of the garment, edge stitching close to that upper inner fold, all the way across to the opposite outer edge of the garment. Mark the button placement onto the ruffle side of your garment as shown on the pattern piece. Sew the buttonholes onto this ruffle side of the garment. Sew your buttons onto the opposite front bodice across from the buttonholes, and the blouse is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. So here's the final fit of the top. I didn't have to make any changes to the pattern and I sewed the extra small. It's a nice, comfortable fit and the ruffles add an interesting detail to an otherwise very simple top. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sew-alongs, and I'll see you in the next video.